You are listening to the Small Town Big Arts podcast. I'm your host, Jeffrey Kirshner, the CEO of the Academy Center of the Arts in Lynchburg, Virginia. In my own work as an arts leader, I have found it difficult to access resources for arts organizations and artists serving smaller communities. On each episode, Small Town Big Arts sets out to drive conversations and provide inspiration for those serving smaller communities through the arts. If you like what you hear, please rate and review us and share with your friends and colleagues who are working to promote the arts in smaller communities across America. You can also learn more by visiting us at smalltownbigarts.com. Welcome to this month's episode. In past episodes, we have interviewed a number of small community arts organizational leaders, and this month, I'm excited to speak with a leader on the funding side of arts delivery, and specifically a leader of a state arts commission. Every state has an arts council or commission that funds arts activity through their state budgets and also serves as a means of delivery of National Endowment of the Arts funding that is coming from the national budget. Today, we have the commission leader from my own state of Virginia. And so I'm very excited to welcome this month Margaret Hancock, who is the executive director of the Virginia Commission for the Arts, overseeing the agency and its multi-million-dollar investments in the arts of all disciplines for the benefit of all Virginians. She studied art history at Duke University, during which she completed an internship with the National Gallery of Art and earned a Master's of Education degree from the University of Virginia. For more than 2 decades, she has worked to advance the missions of prestigious arts, culture, and education institutions, including the National Trust for Historic Preservation, the Savannah College of Art and Design, the University of Virginia, and the National Geographic Society. So, Margaret, thank you so much for joining me for Small Town Big Arts.
Yes, thank you so much for having me, Geoff, and for the opportunity to promote what we're doing at the state level for the arts. This is really exciting.
Well, and I've had the opportunity, I've been serving this year on the board for the Virginians for the Arts, which advocates for state funding for the arts in the state of Virginia. And so I've had the opportunity to see up close the work that Margaret is doing right now in regards to state impact and funds for the arts here in the state. And in particular, she has been has some very specific initiatives oriented around rural arts delivery. And so I thought it was a really fantastic time to talk to somebody on the government side a little bit about the importance of rural arts and the importance of the delivery of the arts. But I think where we can maybe start, Margaret, is I'd love just maybe if you'd share for those who don't know, who may not be in Virginia, or even those in Virginia who might not know, give a little bit of an overview of the Virginia Commission for the Arts, who you all are, what you all do, and its importance.
Yeah, great. Thank you. So, the Virginia Commission for the Arts was established in 1965 when most state agencies were established at the time. National Endowment for the Arts created partnership programs to be able to get federal dollars for the arts out across the entire country. And so the Virginia Commission for the Arts was founded then. We use that those federal dollars as well as state appropriations that come through the General Assembly with a budget then approved by the governor. And we use those dollars to serve Virginians. So we take those appropriations and we run a pretty robust grant program. And that's how we make our investments in Virginia. And I'll say, I think what's so important is that we are the only state agency dedicated to investing in the arts. And so all federal and state dollars come through our agency, which allows us to really have a sense of the impact that we're making and a sense of the arts ecosystem within our state, both areas that are thriving, as well as, we'll talk about this in a little bit, but some areas where there are some gaps.
Yeah, and that's really a big focus and attention that I've been giving to you on small town arts is where rural communities are very unique in how they in how they operate, how economic development works there, how people are connected, and how local government operates. And so I think the state is obviously a connection point, and So Margaret's been working right now on I think something that's really important. And I haven't, I spent some time on a council for Americans for the Arts, and met a lot of the state leaders and the arts commissions and councils across the United States. And it is possible there may be other examples of this in other states, but I was really excited to see some movement happening in Margaret's attempt to make sure that Virginia Commission for the Arts dollars are reaching every single part of the state. And so I really wanted to bring her on today because I wanted to talk about that and share that. So Margaret, if you would tell me a little bit about the initiative, and a bit about what we're trying to do here, and also maybe a little bit of why it's so important.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So the VCA has always been committed to serving a broad range of Virginians. Our language has always said serving all Virginia, benefiting all Virginians, focusing on citizens who may not otherwise have access to art. But there wasn't a measurable outcome of that other than the reporting that we do on the back end,
Hmm.
of how many people were reached, how were you reaching them, what was, some of the demographics that we were looking at. But what we wanted to do is when we started this fiscal year, and we looked at the grants that were going out, I looked at the state map, and we said, okay, there's 133 municipalities. So that's cities, towns, and counties. And so we wanted to look at those 133 and see if we could have grant funding, so specific VCA grants going into every single one of those 133. And we just started putting stars, putting stars,
Love that.
and then we had to shift because we were reaching so many,
Mhm.
that then we had to switch and we put stars just where we weren't. And then what that did was that allowed us to have, we set the intention, right? So the goal has always been to serve all, but what does that look like? And for us, the first step was to set the intention of, well, that looks like having a grant in every single, municipality, so that we know that there is programming, made available that is supported by state funding for every place in Virginia. And the way
Yeah,
to
I love
really
that.
find what is the place is to look at these municipalities and then to overlay that with the map. And I'm super proud to say that as we sit here today, that we only have 11 stars.
That's
Um,
awesome, and that's lower than even a couple of weeks ago when I was in the
yeah,
Virginians for the Arts meeting and we had an update. That's fantastic.
Yeah, and the reason why it's lower, is, we've been very intentional, about reaching those 133 and then looking at, well, who's there that we have not yet funded. And I think it's really easy to say who we are funding. We can pull that from our database, right? But it's a little bit harder to say who we're not funding. And then how can we shift that from who are we not funding to who are we funding? And how are we funding them and how are we getting there? So we've been really activating, and I'll take a moment to tout our rosters, because one of the things that the VCA does, in addition to our grants, is maintains a touring artist roster and a teaching artist roster. And these are vetted, artists ranging in medium. We have everything from puppetry to uh, symphony.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's a great
and
list.
yeah, that goes through. And so if I'm in a rural community and I'm interested in seeking grant funding, how do I also seek an artist? And so we have that resource there. And so we have been having small meetings with all of our roster artists, saying, here's the 11. Do you know anyone? Do you know somebody who knows somebody who may want to bring in programming in those 11? We've been talking about it. You just mentioned it, Virginians for the Arts. Really, if anyone will listen to me, I will talk about getting getting in to every municipality in Virginia here. And I think, this is also just the tip of the iceberg, is really making sure, starting with having 100% funding, and then looking at what that programming is, and then really how we can deepen the experiences and grow the experiences.
Well, I think this is really honorable too. I think we I imagine it's this case for you too. Certainly on the non-profit organizational side, we are often trying to build a positive narrative, and so the sort of easy route to take is to, make the numbers sort of work for you, right? People are often doing that. You can provide big numbers, lots of people, and obviously, I mean, I spend a lot of my time here in Virginia and in a lot of the rural areas because Lynchburg is surrounded by a lot of rural counties, and my family is in Amherst County, which is a rural county outside of Lynchburg. So I spend a lot of time. I grew up in Amherst County, but Virginia has, really densely populated communities in Northern Virginia, in the Hampton Roads area. And so, if we simply focus on the numbers in those areas, right, you're going to get Virginia Commission for Arts can easily put out lots of big numbers about people being impacted. But I
Yeah.
think that is not staying true to the mission. And if you're really going to be true to the mission, then it really has to reach everybody. And I wanted to share that on the podcast because I think very often what the rural communities face is they feel left behind.
Mhm.
They feel not seen, they feel not heard. And in a state like Virginia, like many states, right, there can be these cultural divides that can form due to that feeling. And so I think for a state agency to be saying, hey, we are trying to literally reach every part of the state. We see you. This is valuable. There are funds available to you because some of this is also just education too, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
right? It's just people
Absolutely.
knowing it. Uh,
Absolutely. And I want to jump in real quick on the big
yeah,
numbers because when I joined and we started looking at the numbers that were coming in from arts organizations, the numbers of Virginians served. So that's folks walking through exhibitions, that's folks, participating in a workshop or sitting in an auditorium. And those numbers are over 3 million. And so
yeah.
we are serving more than a third of Virginia. Um, and that's really impressive, right? That's very exciting. So we know the quantity is there. And we know the quality is there because that both the NEA and the VCA are dedicated to artistic excellence. So we know those are there, but the breadth and the reach was what we really wanted to zero in on.
Why, and as a follow up to this, the reaching these rural communities, because it could be you could it could be an easy way out just to focus on, hey, we got lots of numbers, right? But because these smaller communities, some of these impacts are going to be lower numbers. But I would also say that the impact is going to be high though, because just due to the percentage of people within the population there, it's still going to have a huge amount of impact. Why are the arts so important in these rural communities for you?
Yeah. I think one is exposure. I mean, absolute, just simple exposure to the arts is so important. And not just because we're not trying to seek out folks and necessarily turn them into professional artists. But what we're really excited about is when we hear the stories and we hear them, right? We collect so many stories from across the state of how the arts can open our eyes to new ways of being, to new ways of thinking, to new ways of accepting, to new ways of contributing. I mean, these are all things that are so important for a complex world like we live in today, and certainly for Virginia. And I think I want to share just a real simple success story coming out of a Virginia rural community. And that is the Theater Guild of Buchanan County.
Mm,
And Buchanan County did not have a registered 501c3 arts organization in 2015, and they they came together as a community with passionate citizens and began putting on productions. And productions in and of themselves is incredible, right? We're engaging community, we're bringing together patrons. But one of the things that has sort of developed over the last few years is they then took on a long-term lease in a historic building, and so we're beginning to see some community revitalization occurring.
that's
We're
great.
beginning, yes, and then, and I love this, they didn't just engage kids as youth performers, but they brought teens in to share their voice and their perspective on what would make for a good next production. And
Mm,
so the teens in the area were presenting to the board members. So we're getting engaged citizens, we're getting volunteer leadership, we're getting certainly performers and actors, set designers. The list just goes on from what was not in existence at all to now what is a thriving arts organization who for the last 2 years has gotten general operating support. And I'll talk about that as well, is that um, restricted dollars are a little bit easier to come by than unrestricted dollars. And I know you
indeed. Indeed.
know the things that we're really excited about is that by providing operating support grants, we're not being prescriptive. And I think that's especially important in rural
It's
communities.
huge. It's huge. Yeah.
And 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 we know that this investment is worthwhile because of the ripple effect that Virginia as a whole is going to benefit when kids are engaged, when kids are doing better in school, when the community is coming out and gathering, when there's vibrancy, when every single arts organization is a small business here in Virginia, right? And
Yep.
so when these small businesses that are dappling our communities are thriving and innovating, and that's what's at the forefront. And so I think what's so important is this combination of there being passionate citizens out in the rural communities, and they're able to have the resources of general operating support from the state, which it then can be leveraged for additional philanthropic dollars, right? Like, oh, well, the
Yeah.
state gives us this seal of approval, and so
Legitimacy. Yeah.
yeah, and then it all comes back to the state, right? Because we're looking at our youth who are going to be contributing back into the state, and we're looking at um, those that need employment, right? And those that are just seeking to be entertained. I mean, there's so many fronts that what one arts organization or community center that engages via the arts or whatever that looks like can create this huge ripple effect for the state as a whole.
Yeah. One of the things, two points I want to kind of follow up on that is that, so I was just in Keene, New Hampshire last month, and I was at this conference called Radically Rural, which is a economic development conference for rural communities. And one of the things that was said there that really stayed with me when I left is that I think very often the way that community organizers, particularly in the arts, will or local governments will look at rural sometimes is or the models for how to create things in the community is like a mini version of urban, but it really is not ever a mini version of urban. It is its own ecosystem that has its own specific circumstances that really an organization needs to have the flexibility to be what it needs to be for the community where it is and the people that it serves. And these general operating grants, and for those in the sector out there certainly know how rare and important and special these general operating grants are because you know, they're so often with grant funding, there's a little bit of the cart before the horse. And this really allows, organizations to do what they need to do to serve the specific community where they are, which may not meet the urban model, right? Which where a lot of these grants are actually created for urban dynamics. And so I think it's really, really great. And I'll say, what I love about the story about Buchanan is also it echoes a lot of the success stories that I've seen in some of the organizations that I've interviewed across the United States, where where they're doing a bunch in regards to uh, changing the narrative for the community, right? That suddenly, right, they are a symbol now that the community is on the rise as opposed to on the decline, and the arts can really do that. And these young people being invested in that way, they'll stay and they feel good about where they are and where they live. And I think the state participating in that in these rural communities goes a really, really long way. So it's really awesome.
Yeah,
Um,
and Geoff, back to your point from a few minutes ago about being heard. they're being heard as citizens and at the local and state level at that point. And
Yeah.
I mean, how powerful is that for?
Yeah, it's an important lesson for them to learn too, which actually that is a good segue because I wanted to talk a little bit. It's been it's I've really loved serving on the Virginians for the Arts over the last year because I've gotten a glimpse into the state budgeting process. I will, as a citizen of Virginia over the years, I will just sort of see headlines in the newspaper and sort of have a general sense of how the budgeting process is working. But and every year as running an arts organization in the state of Virginia, I know we're always like waiting on the state budget, to sort of know what it means for funding from the Virginia Commission for the Arts each year. But it's been really great to kind of see some of the details of the process itself. And I was wondering, for those out there, share a little bit too. I think I also really like this part of what you're doing in regards to trying to reach every location in the state, because I think it's also important to the political process. So do you mind sharing a little bit about how this is also important to the political process?
Yeah. So I'll talk a little bit about federal dollars first. And the goal of NEA is to reach as many citizens as possible. And we are the conduit for that. The way we have our funding through NEA is there are these partnership agreements, and we apply every year. So for our grantees who think we aren't on that side of things, we are. We have to apply to the NEA. We have a long form and a short form year, and last year we had a long form, and I'm happy to say that we had an increase in NEA dollars. So that's one pot of money that the VCA gets. And then the second pot is through the General Assembly. And the way that happens, state government works on a biennial budget. And so I'm agency head. There's 200 and some agencies in the state, and we all put together our budgets for the next year, 2 years on the biennial. And we present that. It goes through the state. It goes up to the lawmakers in the General Assembly who vote on it, and then that budget progresses to the governor to approve the budget. So there's other steps within that in terms of who looks at the budget, in terms of cabinet members, et cetera. But in general, the General Assembly is who votes on those dollars and who really gives the sign off on the appropriations at that point. And then the VCA takes that, combines it with the federal dollars, and that's our bucket for the year. And the way we allocate it, majority of our grants go through timed grants. Only 2 of them are rolling. And so the rest of them are, come in, grants open in December, and then we do our review. We include citizens on our review, and we have a commission board that votes on all dollars. So there's several steps once we have the funding before we get it back out into the state.
Yeah, and I think when we're thinking about all of that, right, and all the voices and all the eyes, and then the value, right, that the arts provide. I think when we're thinking about rural communities and thinking about the value and the impact felt, and I will just say as someone with the Virginians for the Arts, we want to make sure that the entire state values the arts, because when that happens, then it obviously makes a big impact in regards to how that whole process works.
Yeah. And for those that are serving, those policymakers and lawmakers that are serving in the General Assembly, how wonderful to know that a grant was in your backyard.
Yeah, that they felt it, they saw it, their community members were served by it. And this actually brings up too, they're also, Mark, I know that the grants change sometimes year to year. Are there still going to be in the next cycle, there's still going to be local matching grants that will exist?
There are. So these are called Creative Community Partnership Grants. and they're just that. We
Hmm.
partner with localities. It's a matching grant. And so the local governments will apply through the VCA, and they will then dedicate a portion of their budget, and then we match that. And so we double the impact that is going into the arts through these. And yeah, it's a really incredible grant program, and we encourage every county to take advantage of it. You know, otherwise you're just leaving money on the table. State
Yeah,
funding can go back into the arts.
and I'd say they're really fantastic grants for those in rural communities because on multiple levels. One, you are able to engage your local governments in a
Mhm.
really direct way in regards to arts activity and arts impact and the value of the arts. But also, it tends to be in smaller communities. You're going to be in a scenario in which you're not competing. We run into the city of Lynchburg is about 80,000. And so for that matching grant, there's always a little bit of internal politics and discussion about whether you go after it or not, because there are a bunch of other cultural organizations, right? And only one local government here. And so we often, that's an interesting space to kind of navigate in a larger locale. But in a smaller community, organizations should definitely work to take advantage of this because it's great from an advocacy connection point standpoint, but also these grants in many ways, I think, maybe intentionally or not, are really built for these smaller communities.
Well, they are, and they're non-prescriptive. I mean, we look to the local governments to decide who the subgrantee is and who is going to be receiving that funding. To your point, it's not done at the state level because again, we have trust that these localities are going to maximize and leverage these opportunities and be able to bring the arts to as many of their citizens in the best way for them
Yeah.
individually, so that we are not trying to drive any programmatic decisions. That's not up to us.
Yeah, and that's huge again. I mean, going back to this idea that, each individual community is going to need to create programs that are right for their community, and it gives the ability to do that, or even just capacity building too. I think we just sort of think about all the things that an organization needs to build capacity, and very often these very specific project oriented grants that are out there don't really allow for that. At least on the infrastructure side. So it is really those who are not taking advantage of that um, definitely do, because I think it's just a great opportunity. So we talked a little bit about Buchanan. I was wondering, there's two things I want to ask, and actually, before I get to other examples in the state, I wanted to ask a little bit. I was very also, surprised to hear a little bit of some of the locales where services weren't happening, and I think there also might be a call to action moment too, right? Where we can really think about, hey, how are we, in a community, right? How are we getting, helping you out to make sure that these dollars are reaching every part of the state? Um, I hate to put you on the spot, but are you able to even if generally kind of share where we need to get some people to open up
Yeah,
their browsers and look at the website and engage the Virginia Commission for the Arts?
I would be happy to share, and it's really interesting. So I think if you look at our state, the general sense maybe it's going to be Southwest Virginia, right? That is
Right, that's
where.
where my mind went. I That's
Mhm.
automatically what I thought was gonna be the case when I
And there's only so our the VCA utilizes the Virginia Department of Education's map, and it's divided into 8 regions. And so Southwest Virginia is region 7. And when we look to region 7, there's actually only 2 counties, Scott County and Bland County. If you're out there.
Right, yep, Scott and Bland.
um, and then there is moving towards the center of the state is Region 6, and there's only one there, which is Craig County.
Okay.
So that's my call there. As you can imagine, Northern Virginia, it has a much higher concentration of arts organizations that we're supporting, but we are still seeking Greene and Madison, which
Yeah, and
are
that Green and Madison's so interesting too,
yeah.
because that's close to Charlottesville, and yeah, that's an interest. Those were interesting for me to hear.
And then there's one towards the east in Westmoreland County. So we've done some really tailored outreach there.
Mhm.
And then what's surprising to me, and probably what was surprising to you as you looked at this map, is some areas outside of Richmond,
Yeah,
not too far out of Richmond, Dinwiddie County, Sussex. Let's see here, Charles City County.
yeah, it's so Dinwiddie's surprising too to me, because Petersburg area there, it's just a really
Yeah.
interesting. It's really
Yeah.
interesting.
And then Colonial Heights and Prince George. So that those are kind of the rest in that region. And then I'll tell you where we really are this region 8, which is Charlotte, Prince Edward, Amelia, Lunenburg. Those four all border each other and are not receiving VCA grants to date. So
Yeah, and so I think share a little bit, because we have found with so we have this Academy of Motion program. It's a mobile classroom unit, and it spends a majority of its time actually in our surrounding counties. And there's some obvious partners where it goes that are really clear. There's community centers and YMCA's, and there's some things that we plug into where we provide kind of art components to those locales. But one thing I heard you mention at one point, and I wanted to get this on everybody's radar because it's something that we have found as well, is sometimes so an example is in Campbell County, outside of Lynchburg. We found that the schools didn't have a very robust set of arts programs, and it was the librarians that we plugged into, and it was the libraries. So the bus goes to the libraries, and so I think when we think about arts organizations, or we think about arts funding and delivery, we can sometimes think, okay, well, there needs to be a 501c3 arts organization, and maybe there does need to be, but speak a little bit to maybe creative ways, and some things that people could be thinking about of how funding for Virginia Commission for the Arts could be reaching them. That's maybe not in the traditional sense of like a 501c3 organization that's there. And
yeah. Yeah, this is really important. And this is actually when I spoke to having 2 rolling grants. Um, this is why these are so important, because not every community is an arts organization that is going to receive operating support, so that they can go on and fulfill their mission and reach citizens. That doesn't mean that a locale should not have access to the arts. And so our 2 rolling grants are both associated with our rosters. And so we are looking for community centers, and I'll just be general and say community centers as a whole, where we can bring in our artists and we can host,
yep,
you can host our rosters, artists off our rosters to come in. And libraries are incredible. And again, not every community may have an arts organization. Every county is going to have a library. And the Library of Virginia is a state agency, a fellow state agency. So we have a really strong partnership with them. They have connected us with their community libraries across the state. We are so excited to activate this network, and we have a lot of success stories already with our artists coming in, and it can look different. It can be a family day, and there is a jazz musician on stage. There can be a small after school program, and there's an artist coming in and doing comic books with the students. So the programming, again, is we try to have as many offerings as possible based on what the individual need is for serving these communities. But the conduit there can be a community center, a Y, an after school program, like you said, a school, but certainly a library. And the library's mission and the VCA's missions overlap.
Yeah,
And
lines up great.
yep, and we're both fueling vibrant communities through the work that we do and the funds that we allocate.
Yeah, and my time in the I'm also the son of a former elementary school librarian, so very kind of often thinking about these libraries, but it has been very eye opening as we have intersected, because I'm actually even realizing now here, even in Lynchburg, a large portion of the Academy of Motion programs happen even at our city library here too. We go there very often for exactly the types of events you're talking about, where there's a family day, or we plug in and we provide a specific workshop that's oriented around something, and they're often looking for programs. And I know too that they have also, our city library here, again, Lynchburg's a little bit larger, but they have also brought in touring theater productions at points to perform there on site in the library. So yeah, I think I do want everybody to hear too. I think when we're thinking about the delivery of the arts, the traditional 501c3, the nonprofit arts organization isn't the only means of delivery. And because the Virginia Commission for the Arts has this artist roster, has both and teaching artist roster, this is really, really a resource that folks should utilize and take advantage of.
Yeah, and I just want to say, I think when we talk about family days and we talk about classrooms, there tends to obviously come up an understanding that we're trying to serve youth, but we also are excited to be in senior centers and to be in assisted living, where folks may not be able to get out to a performance, but we can bring a performance to you through the Virginia Touring Grant and artists on our touring roster. So I think we are just wanting to have the arts
Oh
be
yeah.
as accessible as possible to whomever they may be serving.
Yeah, and we think about quality of life too. I think probably in a lot of these assisted living centers in rural communities, obviously, here in Lynchburg, very often our assisted living facilities, and right, they bus their constituents out here to the academy, and we bring them in, and they sit down and they watch a show, and they have these amenities here that they get to access and use. But it's mobility is a thing. So as I say that, I don't mean to sort of be light about it. There are many who can't come to us as well, but they still have these amenities in the community. So I do think when we're thinking about also organizations like that can bring something to them, and create that when there may not be a large arts and culture organization or institution that they can utilize there in their own city or town. So
Right,
um,
and you don't have to. I think this is important to say, you don't have to have a 500 person auditorium either to have a really meaningful arts experience. That we could bring a handful of ballerinas in. We
yeah, it
could
might be
bring,
even more meaningful actually to be in a small
right?
space, actually.
Yes, and so I think that's something too when we think of the scale. And I started an earlier question about this, of the simple exposure to the arts. And exposure can be one to one. It doesn't need to be bright lights on the stage, with a very filled auditorium. That is one means of delivering the arts for sure. It is not the only one.
Absolutely.
And thinking about some of the other arts that are more accessible in smaller venues too. For instance, literary arts. We have poets, and they will come and do a poetry slam at a local Rotary Club night. I mean, it's
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
the possibilities are endless when we think about who can host and what kind of artists. And we're so excited that the VCA grant is the conduit and the connector between those two.
Yeah, that's great. Well, Margaret, as we wrap up, I wanted to ask, you were now, has it been about a year?
Yes, almost two.
Almost two. Oh my God. Time is crazy.
Mhm.
So well, so 2 years in, what is your obviously, you're established now in the position. what is your vision for the Virginia Commission of the Arts in the coming months and years ahead?
Yeah, so it's a great question. I think the arts, but certainly a state agency for the arts, is really uniquely positioned to elevate so many aspects of Virginia. We've talked a lot about them today. We've talked about education, community revitalization, mental health, and behavioral health.
Hmm.
We're doing some content based work around opioid use. I just think that we are uniquely positioned to be a problem solver and to seek solutions and to seek new opportunities for Virginians. And I want to share one new initiative that really demonstrates this. And because we are a state agency, we can and should be partnering with other state agencies. And so the VCA has forged a partnership with Virginia Department of Health, and we have launched what is called the Passport Program. And the Passport Program is for WIC cardholders, women, infant, and children. And these program cardholders across Virginia can use that WIC card as a passport to discounted or free tickets and be participating in cultural venues and events with no additional card or registration is needed. And what we're really trying to do is, again, that's sort of been the theme of removing barriers and increasing access to the arts. And this program is designed to make the arts more accessible to low income families, those who have already become engaged with the state. And we really ultimately will be promoting community engagement through the arts across the entire Commonwealth of Virginia. So I think as the VCA pilots this program, we'll have even deeper perspective of this. But I really would say my vision for the VCA and our agency is for the arts to be the go-to, is to
Yeah.
be the go-to when we're looking at society and we're looking at um, complexities and we're looking at solutions and we're looking at joy.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. I will share here at the Academy, we've been very excited about this new passport program, and we're getting ready. We're setting it up through our box office now, and really encourage anybody out there to take advantage of this. It's a great way to plug in, um, and provide it. As Margaret said, it removes another barrier. Um, we often say here at the Academy too, we often use the Brecht quote when we think about the arts, which I'm hearing sort of echoed back. I'm paraphrasing it, but essentially, art is not a mirror but a hammer. And we, sort of thinking about this idea that the arts are a utility and a tool across many sectors. And we think about state arts delivery, and we think about collaboration. I think it's really important in rural and smaller communities. I think this is a connection point for you, and many of the stories that we've told over time on the podcast. You very often see with the organizations that find success, they have been able to create really clear, tangible value to their community. The community really understands, and very often that's happening through these cross-sector collaborations. Whether it be workforce development, health, other things of this nature. So it's really exciting to hear that. Margaret, share. We've talked a lot about all these resources. I want to make sure that we also have an opportunity for everybody to have info on where to find you all, and where to find some of the information that we talked about today.
Yeah. Well, we have just recently redone our website, so I'm super proud of it. It's ADA accessible. It has simplified how you reach all of the grant parameters. So I invite everyone to visit vca.virginia.gov. That's GOV. So vca.virginia.gov.
Yeah.
And then the second means of connecting with us is on Instagram. So we have a pretty robust Instagram page, and it's just at Virginia Arts.
And I've been really impressed by that too. Instagram is my social media drug of choice, and so I'm very often on Instagram, and that's very often how I keep up And I appreciate it because actually there were reminders for me, like the passport program. I was like, oh, right. And I had, was pushing our team to make sure that they were, following through. And so, I will say that it's been great. The social media presence has been really high. And I know too, I'll just share, there's new video content out there right now too, that can give you a little bit of an overview of the organization. But Margaret, I really appreciate this. And, just also, from somebody coming from, the central sort of southwestern part of the state, we really appreciate the advocacy for arts funding, in these smaller rural communities. I really think it's critical to the health of the state, to the health of our society here in America. I think the arts are obviously community building, and they are build bridges across divides. And so, and I think in many ways, these rural communities are where those bridges can be built. So I really thank you from us down here in Lynchburg, Virginia, and the surrounding counties. We really appreciate it a ton.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. Thanks for inviting me on today. It's really exciting to have so many initiatives going that we know, it's sort of a sum of all the parts.
Yeah,
We know that when we add in WIC card holders and we add in rural communities and we add in libraries, and we are really truly bringing our mission to life. So thank you for the platform and the opportunity to be able to talk about this with you today.
absolutely. And I would encourage everybody too, no matter what state and locale you're in, your state has a council or commission that is set up. Every state has it. And so, even outside the Virginia Commission for the Arts, make sure that you are plugging in and seeing what is happening on your state level, and how you can be a part of advocating for rural funding across the states. So, Margaret, thank you so much, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Small Town Big Arts. Remember to rate and review us and share with your friends. To learn more, visit us at smalltownbigarts.com. Until next time, I'm your host, Jeffrey Kirshner.